Okay, so good morning everybody. It's a beautiful Saturday morning in London and I'm Lisa Barnwell, and this is Lisa Barnwell Presents Bumps in the Boardroom, a global conversation on the pregnancy advantage for business. I'm really looking at the real value of the pregnancy mind and the value that I believe women bring to the workplace during their pregnancy and when they return as mothers, if that's something they choose to do. And I've really loved this week. I've had an amazing amount of support from my guests, and today is my 11th and final guest before I do my own sort of talk tomorrow. And I've had a really lovely mix. We started the week with Kelsey Grant talking about sort of self-love for mums and how important it is to really look after yourself during your time as a woman, but particularly when you're pregnant and becoming a new mother. And then we looked at the more creative aspect from a very gifted intuitive who looked at the creative sort of side of things. And then we had a much more scientific approach and the research from Victoria Bourne. And on Wednesday we moved to Geraldine Gallagher at Executive Coaching, which was excellent, and looking at how maternity coaching and the vast model of pregnancy and maternity management can really be affected. And I also had a busy day on Wednesday. I had 3 interviews. So we also talked to Maria Pagano, one of my clients at Visa, and she is just 22 weeks pregnant in her second pregnancy and working full-time as a PR manager. And I also talked to one of my lovely clients from a couple of years ago, Tracy Alford, who's based now in Singapore working for Shell, and a friend of my guest today. So that was Wednesday. Thursday we moved on, and we had, goodness, I'm trying to keep up with all my guests. I know yesterday we had lovely entrepreneurs, Carly Hope and Joanna Martin, talking about their experiences of stepping out of the corporate workplace and how as entrepreneurs they had the freedom to work out what they were doing. And yeah, oh that's right, Thursday we had Catherine Parks, HR from 3M, which was a really interesting conversation. As a maternity manager, as a HR manager, looking at it from both a personal and professional perspective. And I also spoke to Gail Thomas, who's setting up a really brilliant organisation, 2 to 3 days, looking at part-time opportunities for women who want senior roles and good roles but just don't want to work 5 days a week. So I'm delighted to introduce Karina Cooper, who's my guest today. And Karina is a client of mine. She became mum to her little boy Archie a few months ago, and she works in London as a hedge fund manager. So welcome. Good morning, Karina.
Good morning, Lisa. Hi. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, my absolute pleasure. So I know your time is precious as a new mum, and you've got a busy little schedule. So I'm super pleased that you've joined me this morning. And really it's just to get a really nice balanced perspective. As I say, I talked to Tracy about her return to work. Her little girl Rose now is a couple of years old. And we've got Maria, who's transitioning through her second pregnancy. So I'd love to talk to you about your experiences currently being on maternity leave. And I know that you joined your company just a year or so before finding out you were pregnant, and it's a quite new company. So looking at how that went for you personally, really, and how the experiences have gone, and I will share with you my findings on the pregnancy mind and how I think it really can be looked at in a positive way by employers, and why perhaps it's not at the moment.
Great.
So could you just set the scene for us and tell us a little bit about sort of your pregnancy and
Sure.
Archie arriving?
Yeah. So I joined my firm, as you said, just over a year ago, and I work in compliance for a London-based hedge fund, and I have worked in compliance for quite a few years, and I made that transition, obviously not knowing that this would happen, and it came as a surprise, but
A lovely one.
Yeah, indeed, and so I fell pregnant sort of a few months into my new role, actually, and it was a surprise to them and a surprise to me. But they handled it quite well. But the challenge was, obviously I was the first one, and to break that news and to sort of the unknown, and sort of being the first woman in the business to do that. It was quite a nervous time. as well. But an interesting one, to say the least. I was actually involved in, so my boss actually involved me in the policy sort of the considerations and the research that he'd done, which I found quite helpful. But the challenge was also my role is quite demanding, and sort of maintaining that momentum whilst sort of the early stages of pregnancy, which were quite tough for me. I was fairly unwell and felt sort of fairly tired throughout the first 3 months, and being a new business, it's quite demanding, and also there's a certain degree of for me, it's a sort of that being a perfectionist in that way of wanting to give, but then sort of trying to pull back and thinking of yourself and the baby, obviously. But that was quite a tough time.
And I think that's the situation is, you know, a company can sort of say, look, we're thrilled for you and we want to be supportive, and it's fantastic they included you in that sort of discussion process. But equally, you know, it is very difficult when you've got the demands of a small business. And we were talking just before this of an article I found last year written by the Green and Blacks founder, Josephine, I can't remember her surname off the top of my head, apologies Josephine, what's her name, but it was an interesting article talking about how as small businesses, I mean, her title as a boss, maternity leave is a nightmare for employers. I thought wasn't actually the most supportive. Josephine Fairley from Green and Blacks. But reading the article, I understand what she's saying is that it can be very difficult. But what I see is when a company gets it right during that period, then they build a real trust and a real loyalty and a real respect with their employer, with their employee, and you're much more likely to return to work afterwards. And it can be a real challenge for them, because if they're not expecting it, as you say, you know, these days really employers should be expecting it. You know, if you're of a certain age, then there's a great likelihood that you are going to be thinking of having a family. And actually something that Sheryl Sandberg says in her book in Lean In is that we should be much more open about our desires as sort of individuals to talk about, you know, wanting to have families or wanting to progress in various different ways. And I think that's something, certainly in the UK, from my experience, is something we don't do. You know, we're not that open, and often, you know, women hold back on that news, on sharing that news. But actually, the sooner you start that dialogue, the easier it is for everybody then to make a plan and work with it.
I think the sort of the UK generally struggles with the sort of element of flexibility, and that sort of, I guess, work as an event, not a location. So for most businesses can accommodate that, I think. But I think it's not like sort of Scandinavia, where it's fairly accepted and the norm to be flexible and to have a lengthy time out of work and to return. But some businesses are getting there, and some businesses are far better than others. But yeah, I mean, for me it was a challenge in that I was the first one, and to set that precedent. And they were fairly conscious of that, actually, knowing that there are other females in the business, and so I think that was one of the challenges for them.
Yeah, you're the first, but you're not likely to be the last. So,
no,
you know, and actually, you know, when it works, when it's managed well, and, you know, like anything, the very first time, it's not ever going to be perfect, and it is a learning curve, and it's also different for everybody, because my experience of looking after women in their pregnancy is each individual pregnancy is different. Some women breeze through the first trimester, but a lot of women don't. And in my experience, actually, the more sort of high-flying A-type you are, the harder that first trimester tends to be. And it is that conflict of you're trying to give everything to your business, but actually that's when your body is doing so much work. And it's often a time when you don't feel comfortable to share the news as yet, because it's not totally solid. So, you know, I don't advocate sort of sharing the news before you're ready, but I definitely encourage sort of opening that dialogue as soon as you do feel ready, and sort of doing that, because I think as an employer, it definitely allows you to plan far better, and to support that transition. But I was looking at some statistics this morning as well about sort of maternity leave throughout Europe and throughout the world. I mean, the States seem to have a very tough time, and I'm going to be doing some work over there. But certainly in Europe, as you say, in Norway, Sweden, Scandinavia, they seem to have a much more inclusive approach of pregnancy, and it's far more supported with paternity leave as well. So I think with companies, what I'm discovering is certain industries get it a lot more than others, and companies working in media or working in other areas seem to have just a more flexible approach, as you say, to the working world generally. And so when you're in an environment where it's quite structured, you know, it can be quite difficult. And is that the nature of sort of finance, do you think, and compliance, that it needs to be so structured?
I can't sort of speak for all firms and the entire industry, but it's just the times that we live in. There's a regulatory shift globally. The demand for people who have this expertise is increasing, and therefore the sort of demand placed on those individuals is pretty high. And so you do have to give quite a lot, and you do have to be available. And that's the nature of this type of job and this profession that I chose. So it's sort of it's driven by firms, but it's also driven by the economy and frankly just the environment, the sort of economic environment that we're currently in. Everything is fast moving. Regulation hasn't stopped. Developments are left, right, and centre, and so there is a lack of resource, and particularly for a small firm where you're trying to contain costs as well. And I'm very conscious of that, and you do have to sort of give as much as you can. So this type of role is fairly demanding. But you know, spread out over 24 hours. So slotting in some sleep. And also the sort of regulation isn't just sort of Europe, is it? Sort of the US and Asia. It depends where you operate. So it's a bit like sort of triage or A&E triage in a way. Sometimes some days can be like that. And I think sort of compliance departments across the UK, or particularly for sort of larger firms as well that have the resource, it might be slightly easier for those who have teams of 20, 30 people, but smaller hedge funds tend not to have that. So there is a lot of responsibility on the individuals that are part of the small team and a small business. To work a little bit longer than other firms possibly.
Yeah, and that is challenging, and I think, you know, as you say, it's for a lot of it, it's give and take, and you know, I'm sure, you know, when there's the best will in the world, if you have work that needs to be done, it's very difficult to say, oh, we'll just, you know, have a rest today or work from home. And I know that companies are looking at those sorts of solutions with the technology and things that we have in order to do that, and to give some flexibility. And that's been the common theme coming through all week, is that when there's flexibility, when there's understanding of pregnancy, that can make a difference. And I don't know how much experience your team have of pregnancy generally in their lives personally, and that can often make a difference when you've experienced it sort of firsthand. You've got a better understanding. But what I've been looking at particularly is the changes in the brain that happens during pregnancy, because particularly the women that I work with are in jobs such as yours. You know, they're very detailed, they're very organised, they're very structured, and so you rely on your left side of your brain, your logical cognitive functions, to do that very well. And actually what happens in pregnancy is that left side of the brain slows down due to pregnancy hormones, and the right side expands. And what Dr. Bourne shared on Tuesday was that the reason for that, we believe now, is to allow you as a mother to become much more in tune with your baby, both when it's in the womb and also after it's born, to pick up on various different cues. And so when you're in an environment where you're having to focus on that left side, you're not enabling that other side to really develop. So the transition to becoming a mum can be much harder if you haven't had that time to kind of step back from the working environment and then, you know, allow that other creative side to come out. And something that, you know, the entrepreneurs shared yesterday was that when they were able to plan their pregnancies and when they were able to give them more space and actually take time back, they found that their creative side in terms of support for their business grew enormously. But they were in a position where that was factored in. They'd sort of set up in their life plan that, okay, this is how we want it to go, and changes have been made. And I know from your experience, Archie made a rather early sort of appearance anyway. He was keen to get into the world.
Yeah.
So how much did you actually have any maternity leave at all, or how did it?
I had a couple of days.
That was a long time.
So he arrived 4 days into my maternity leave, but I did actually have to go into work for a couple of meetings before that. So I'd gone on leave on the Friday, and I went in on the Tuesday for a meeting, and then he arrived on the Thursday.
Okay. And how long were you planning to take off? How far in advance were you finishing?
So a month. Yeah.
A month.
So yeah, and yes, so that didn't happen.
No, and it was interesting in my call with Maria, actually one of my other clients, who's Italian. I think she said in Italy that it's compulsory to take maternity leave quite a bit earlier, and I think possibly 2 months out, to possibly avoid that time and to allow that transition. And certainly from Victoria's point of view, not allowing the brain time to adjust can actually be quite disorientating, and I see a lot of women who really struggle in the early stages, and that's why I do give a lot of support in that early period, because you're not only coping physically with the changes of giving birth, however that has happened to go, you're also coping with sort of feeding and the lack of sleep, so you've got those physical drains on you and those physical demands, but mentally as well as emotionally you've got this real change in your brain, and it's almost like you don't know yourself. And a lot of women say to me, I just don't think in the same way. I can't sort of connect with that. What was your experience of that?
Well, it was essentially sort of baptism by fire, really. So just the way he arrived, I had to get sort of rushed to hospital, as I'm sure a lot of ladies have. I had a placenta problem, which contributed to his early arrival, and I was in hospital for a week. Due to the emergency cesarean, so they were sort of having a major operation, plus being a new mother, plus sort of just been at work 2 days prior to that, and there was nothing at home, and sort of hadn't prepared for it really mentally. So I was planning to do that when I left the office. So it really was just sort of as I said, back to my fire, sort of being in the hospital helped, actually, I have to say, sort of forcing you to just focus on this small person and yourself, and what on earth you're going to do, and with this little thing you have to look after. So the week in hospital really helped, and I don't think my brain was functioning left or right side for that week at all.
It was pretty shocking. I mean, obviously I knew you at that time, and was sort of working with you at that time to give you some support, and it was a pretty traumatic experience. I've supported a lot of births, and a lot of women who have difficult births, but yours was particularly tricky, I think, for you and your partner. And as you say, not giving yourself that time, and actually it was of benefit, I think, to allow you that time in the hospital to get your head around it. But did you find it a challenge being a new mum with just trying to pick up the reins very quickly?
Yes, I think I put a lot of strain on myself, because I like to be organised. I need to know where everything is, and obviously having a baby, you can't do that. It's sort of, you don't know how to first of all change nappies. You have to be taught that, and how much to feed, when to feed. So it was all entirely new, and I didn't have anything of my own personal belongings in hospital for quite a few days. So my husband helped to bring those to hospital, but I think that so the challenge was the unknown, plus not being able to mentally prepare, so being in hospital really helped. But whilst it wasn't the sort of comforts of your own home, I did appreciate sort of not being allowed out for that,
having
time.
having people to care for you, I think, as well, you know, forcing you to do that. Because when you have a preemie baby as well, you know, looking after your baby becomes a little bit more complex as well. It isn't as straightforward to feed.
No.
You know, there's more areas of vulnerability. So, you know, you've got that additional pressure as well, which you had to contend with.
Yeah, it was sort of the daunting reality of having to take him home so small. I guess sort of it dawned on me that sort of as we were leaving hospital that I have to do this on my own, and I have to somehow
I'm
figure it out.
responsible for this now. Yeah.
I've got one book at home, and
Archie didn't read at that stage, so he couldn't read it and follow what he was meant to be doing anyway. So he had his own ideas.
Unfortunately not, but it was just a complete shift. And so your life doesn't go back to how it was 24 hours ago ever. And sort of it's a much bigger shift for women than it is for men.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think, sorry, go on.
No, it's just that so my husband could go back to work after 2 weeks of providing immense help, I must add. But your life is completely different from the moment you're in hospital, and in a good way as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But do you think generally, you know, we don't understand that so much? I mean, I know we talked before you sort of were feeling sort of confident to take Archie out and things, but we talked about, you know, what a shift you've been through, and it's that the only thing I can liken it to is when I went through my bereavement, and suddenly, you know, my world had completely shifted, and when I stepped out the door, nobody else knew that, and yet internally there was so much going on for me, and I went through a phase of actually having some panic attacks because my base, my structure had just completely shifted. And I've talked to women who've had babies and have said, you know, this is the same sort of feeling. It's the same sort of experience because for the outside world, you look, you know, the same, but actually internally there is so much shifted. And like you say, you'll never be the same again.
Yeah. It's fairly daunting, I think, because sort of becoming a mother later in life. Your life is fairly organised up until that point. You're free to do whatever you want to do, really, and then you suddenly can't. So you have to adjust almost instantly to not being able to do that for a considerable amount of time from here on. So that you have to get your head around mentally, and this person needs you, and you're the person that can provide that, and it's just an immense sense of responsibility. Different to the responsibility that you've ever had in the workplace, but also having that as well lingering in the background, sort of, you know, is it going okay? You know, have I left everything? You know, how I ought to have left it, and then, you know, sort of torn between. I think after a few weeks, you should start to think. I certainly did start to think about work again, but that's changing now. I've been sort of 4 months into my maternity leave. Slightly more relaxed, but then sort of starting now. I've sort of gone back to the office, colleagues, and sort of starting to think about how on earth you're going to sort of juggle all of this as well.
And I think that's the thing. I mean, you have that initial sort of immediacy of just such a massive change, which can be difficult to get to. And then most of the women I see are very conscientious about their work, so you don't just switch off. And that's another reason why I feel like if you were able to have a bit more time beforehand, sort of switching off so that you've done a handover, you would let go of that level of responsibility and have more space to sort of take on this new level, because you don't just drop work, you know, even though you may not physically be there, as you say. Most of the women I see, you know, still have that going on in the back of their mind if they haven't stepped away. And then I think, you know, there is that period of transition where you know, become more confident as a mother. You know, things start to work a bit more. You start to bond with your baby. You get to know him more, and you get to understand more. And you become, you know, as each day goes on, you kind of tick that off and think, right, okay, we made it through this day. We made it through this day. And then you start getting into a bit more of a routine. But, you know, you're 4 months down the line now. And that's not very long at all, really, to get your head around this whole new situation. And, you know, I think obviously in this country we have up to a year's maternity leave, But I know for a lot of companies, a year is a very long time for them to manage an absence, especially a small company. And I understand that actually legally they're not allowed to ask you when you're about to return to work. And that's something which was raised in the article I was reading. And I do think that's quite a tricky one, because for me it is about having this open dialogue. And even if you just say as the employer, I don't know yet, I honestly don't know yet, and actually the thought of trying to manage this job and my baby at the moment scares the pants off me. I don't think I can really think about it. At least having that sort of dialogue I think would be quite helpful, but I think a lot of us would hold back on that, because we don't want to say to our employer, you know, look, I'm not ready, or I'm not that. So we avoid the conversation altogether. And as I say, the employer's not allowed to ask you. So that can be quite challenging to manage. What's your thought on that?
I think, I mean, I agree with your points, and I think that it's also different for. I mean, each woman experiences, so each mother experiences has different experiences rather, and different employers approach it in different ways, and I think that communicating to them when you're ready is the right thing to do, but it's sort of give and take as well. I think that to a certain degree it depends obviously on the type of business, but to be a little bit more open, and to have that, to create that environment where they can be a bit more open. But it's incredibly difficult, as you say, because you don't want to ruffle feathers. You may change your mind. You don't want to be perceived as indecisive, particularly during this time, and when they're relying on you to fulfil your role again. There's an immense amount of responsibility, sort of particularly for me as well, to give the right message. And to be clear about that. So I think personally I will tell them when I'm ready to go back, and I may go back earlier, I may go back a bit later, but they've been quite sort of understanding about that though, and sort of saying, you know, it would be great if you could come back a bit earlier, but we understand that you might not be able to do that, and I think that type of message is important as well.
It's a fine line, isn't it?
Yeah, but I do understand how it can be incredibly difficult, and the perception of that message as well to others, because I think that in some instances it can be perceived as sort of, you know, having a holiday away from work. I
don't think it is.
Now I know that it is not. You know. Yeah, I mean, so you hear jokes sort of bandied around about, sort of, you know, it's your baby holiday or whatever, but it certainly is not. Yes, it's actually more difficult. This job is more difficult than my other job, my professional job, so to speak. But no, I mean, I completely understand how it's difficult to relay that message, and how careful you have to be when you do communicate to your employer.
Yeah, and I think from the employer's point of view, you know, it's a fine line balance between being kind of pushy and saying, when are you coming back? You know, we really want you back. And saying, you know, we would love to have you back, you know, that we're missing you. And that can be, you know, very difficult for them to say. And when you know that, you know, they would love to have you back, it's really important. But, I mean, something that Tracy said actually was that she didn't feel that going back before 6 months, you know, would be smart for anybody. And I know the research backs that up as well, in terms of your mental capacity. And I've had clients who've gone back sooner. I've had clients go back, you know, within 3 months, and we've worked very closely together to get, you know, I had a client recently, and we worked very closely to have a plan of attack, really. So we did a lot of yoga and a lot of reflexology, and we were looking at her diet and really sort of working with her to build up her confidence, to build up her energy, and to get herself in a good space. And it was her second baby, and it was something that she had made a choice to do based on the situation in her workplace. But most clients I know don't even contemplate it before 6 months, because that first few months just go by so fast, and it's not until around 6 months that you start to think, okay, I'm kind of getting the hang of this. I'm starting to feel some sense of normality. you know, and sort of this feels more like the norm than my old life, you know, and that takes a lot longer to transition than I think a lot of people realise. You know, you don't just wake up, you know, a month in and go, oh yeah, this is familiar. I mean, some people do. Some people, you know, move into pregnancy and motherhood very easily, and it's like that's the work they were born to do. But for most of the clients that I see, who focused on a career and, as you say, are having their babies a bit later, it's a big shift. So I think having that period of transition and welcoming that period of transition can actually be very, very beneficial. And what I've found from my research and from talking as well to these entrepreneurs that have planned it more, is when you're actually given that space, when you're actually able to step back and not feel pressured to even consider when you're going to go back to work, that's when actually a lot of creativity comes about. And that's often when you open up to new ways of doing things. And it may be that you think of other ways to do that outside of your company, but quite often what can come about is you actually look at new ways of doing your role, you look at new ways of working and see things that couldn't be seen when you were so closely in it. And so in a new business, when they're, you know, making up a lot of the rules and doing things in a way that could be incredibly advantageous, you know, if you're able to have that space to then come back with some fresh ideas, because most of us, you know, when we're working, don't have a lot of time out to just look at the bigger picture and to think about things in a different way. And so pregnancy, you know, and new motherhood can be that time when you're given the space. But as you say, most of the day is pretty busy. It's not like you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs, you know, whatever. But a lot of women have said that they get into quite a meditative state when they're breastfeeding, and actually, you know, it can become actually quite relaxing and can become quite a process of creativity. I don't know what your experience is of that, if you've ever found that experience.
Yeah, so breastfeeding was difficult for me, given that Archie was premature.
Exactly.
So we struggled with that. So I can't really sort of really relate to that. It was something that we decided not to pursue after a couple of months. Both of us were quite relieved, I think.
But do you find even the process of feeding him quite relaxing?
I do, yes, yeah. But at the same time, so bottle feeding is something different, in that you sort of have to watch and be careful that he's not choking, and now that he's a bit older, it's quite quick now. He sort of drinks quite quickly. So
he's a thirsty boy.
yeah. So sitting down and you sort of think, okay, I can just sort of sit back and think about other things. It tends to sort of peter off now. He sort of feeds in 10-15 minutes sometimes. Okay. Then so you're back onto changing, burping, and then the next activity until he starts to snooze. So initially, sort of when he was very small, he did sleep a lot. But in terms of sort of me, I tried to sleep as well during those. Which I highly recommend. Yes, I highly recommend. Yeah. So but I think, yeah, the downtime is now getting less and less now that he's getting older. But that may change. I'm sort of delving into the unknown here, so that may change, and I may get that opportunity, but not just yet. No. Well, I think that's the thing, is it's peaks and troughs, isn't it? So you have that initial sort of intensity, and then it sort of eases out. But every day is different, and I think that's something that a lot of my new mothers say to me, is that just as you think you've got one little routine down pat, you know, it goes out the window, and a new sort of phase comes in. Yeah, and I think that's the thing with a developing, growing baby, is they're not, you know, I know there are different ways that you can work with a baby to get them into a routine, but even then, you know, babies are individual, and they have their own ideas on things, and they don't generally perform like robots, the ones that I work with, for sure. I mean, you can get some sort of pattern, but there's got to be that flexibility. And I think when you come out of quite a structured environment, again, you know, that can be quite a difficult thing to get to grips with as well. That lack of control, that lack of organisation, and just being able to go a bit more with the flow. But actually, that can be a massive asset to you, to learn that as a skill set, if it's not something that's come into your everyday working life. And it might feel really uncomfortable to you.
you know, because it's so different to how you are as an individual personality, but also how, you know, you fitted into a work environment that kind of supports that and enjoys that and embraces that. And so when you're in an environment like being a new mum where it's going very different, you know, that can be something to get your head around. But actually these are the new skills that often we don't appreciate that you're learning. You know, you're learning to multitask in a way that you never knew you could do before. You know, there are many skills that you are picking up now, which will be of massive asset to your company. So you're learning all the time, and I think that's not embraced and not understood so much by businesses and by society as a whole. I mean, we, like you say, we talk about women having a baby holiday. I mean, you're hard at it every day, learning. You know, you're learning new things every day, and
minimal sleep and
so
exactly. Endurance is like a sort of a different type of endurance test, but you know, and it's nice to know that. So that it be just sort of the positive components of the small business is that it's nice to know that you can be there to help others who may sort of go through the same experience, and to set that precedent as well is nice to know. It's nice to know. So if I can change that in any way, that to me is great as well.
Yeah. I mean, what would be the main things that you would improve on? You know, that if you were you are writing the policy, you're very much involved in that. So what do you think are the key things to be mindful of when you're looking after somebody during that phase?
I think just so understanding the appointments and just how much time it takes to transition into the maternity leave itself. If you have a lot of responsibility and you do have a very busy job, the handover is incredibly time intensive and exhausting as well in a way. So to understand the time it takes to put that together, to hand that over to the next person, in addition to doing your day-to-day role. So advising the business, but also making sure that you're passing on something that's fairly organised and easy to sort of review and so forth. That to me is important as well. So just sort of suggesting just to do a handover and is. It's fairly flippant, but it's also to understand just how much that involves, and to juggle the appointments that you have as well. So external appointments with hospitals, doctors, whatever. I didn't appreciate just how time-consuming some of those can be. Having managed someone who had two children as well, just sort of getting from A to B and then being back in the office and sort of managing work impeccably. I very much appreciate that now that I've done it myself.
Yeah, and that can be quite stressful, you know, if you're trying to sort of get all your appointments done and then get back to the office. You know, it means that you're not fully committed to where you are at each time. You're always conscious of, you know, getting back. So having flexibility around that and being able to perhaps, you know, have those appointments at different times and work from home and
they're actually, you know, quite special
around
moments. They're sort of fairly special moments that you don't get back, because these are the scans that you have.
Are
fairly magical, and I didn't appreciate that until it happened to myself. So it's sort of it's nice to have an understanding employer that gives you that time and doesn't question it. But so having that time, but also you give back in a way. So just sort of maintaining that organisation but at different times of the day. If you're taking time out, and you know, you can give it back in other ways as well. But,
I mean, it's interesting what you say about the handover, because you know, trying to do that when you're later in your pregnancy is tiring and is challenging because of the changes in the brain, and that's what I think we don't appreciate. I think we don't realise, and many women I see really push through on that and don't recognise the changes that are going on in their brain because they're not given the space to allow that. So when you're trying to be very focused, very diligent, very organised, and doing a very structured handover, that's so going against the grain of nature. at sort of 7-8 months. But you know, you were doing that, what, at 8.5 months, or 8? No,
8 months.
It would have been about 7.5, wasn't it?
Yeah.
8 months. Yeah. So actually, from 6 months is when they really see a peak in your brain function changing. So in an ideal world, you would actually do a lot of that main handover sort of around 6 months, because after that is when everything actually starts to change. So and you know, I don't know what company would say, oh yeah, let's do that, but actually it's interesting when I've seen companies who have had an employee transition out sooner, they actually tend to transition back in sooner as well, because it's not such a jarring process. You know, and I know the norm is to work as late as possible to show your commitment to the company, and then want to have as much time with your baby afterwards. But actually, in terms of working with your body and your mind, it kind of goes against the grain. It doesn't actually. So we're not really listening to Mother Nature in that instance.
No. I mean, I certainly feel slightly guilty of that. Just so not pulling back as much as I would have liked to, but it was my choice. It wasn't something that was sort of dictated to me. It was my choice, and you know, I'm my own worst enemy, and sort of being fairly exhausted at the end of the day, but sort of pushing through, because you can do that extra sort of, I'll get that extra document reviewed, or I'll draft this extra bit.
And you're totally not alone in that. That's so common, and I think most women that I speak to in positions of your sort of level, even different levels, you know, have that attitude. But certainly, you know, that's very common. And again, I think that's something that ideally, as a society, we would look to change that, because that's putting an added pressure in there that perhaps doesn't need to be there.
Indeed. But I think it's sort of, it's a difficult shift, because you do want to produce something of a certain quality, and there is it's sort of slight feeling of guilt in a way, because you're not going to be there, and you're leaving quite large projects behind. So yeah, that was quite a challenge for me, I think, sort of leaving it.
Yeah, well, I think
quite abruptly so as well, but.
Yeah. I think until your baby arrives, you know, your career has been your baby. For most of us, you know, we really put our heart and souls into our careers. You know, we build them up. We're not just, you know, showing up for the fun of it. You know, we've got an invested interest. We've got a commitment to that, and you've got a strong work ethic and a desire to achieve your potential and do your best. So I think all of those feelings are there. So it's a really emotive process generally, stepping away from that. And letting go of that. And again, that's what I've noticed in my experience, is supporting women with that transition to kind of step away and allow that to happen is really challenging. It's really challenging.
I mean, what this has taught me, I think, I certainly have a lot of respect for women who've had children and who work full time and juggle all of that. I have a new appreciation for just how hard that is. I'm sort of going to be stepping back into that. So it has changed me personally, but it also sort of has made me much more appreciative of ladies who do juggle and sort of maintain that sort of their profession and also a family as well. Yeah.
Well, I think women naturally have the ability to multitask and to manage lots of things. But I think, you know, in talking to Gail actually from 2 to 3 days, you know, who does have a family and runs her business and is now setting up this new venture, you know, women are very good at that, but they also have to really learn to plan ahead and really have to always be one step ahead, because you're always thinking of, has the child got this, has the child got that, what about if this happens, what about if this happens, and you've always got lots of things. And that's what can be so exhausting for so many women, is they actually stop living in the moment and just enjoying the moment, and they're so busy planning everything and making sure all bases are covered for every future eventuality. And I think that's a big area to sort of work on and to give women support with. I mean, in order to manage a job and manage a home and manage a relationship and all the other things that you want to include in your life, I think you have to do it with support. I don't think it's healthy to try and do it on your own. I don't think it works to do it on your own. And so learning to delegate and learning to find people that you trust, having a really good support team, I think, is absolutely key. And again, you know, the only thing I can draw on is my experience of running a business, and I delegate far more than I ever used to. I've got an amazing support team now, and I love it when they take things over and handle it. And I never used to, though. You know, when I had my clinic for 6 years, I ran it single-handedly, and pretty much ran myself into the ground in the process.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, what I've learned as a woman is we try and do things ourselves, and actually it's not a smart way to go. So, you know, certainly the more you can get a good support team in, that, you know, the better the process is for everybody as well.
Yeah, indeed.
So, okay, great. Well, look, it's been wonderful having a conversation with you, and thank you for being so open and honest and sharing, you know, your experiences. And I think, you know, the whole purpose of this conversation is to encourage other conversations. And I think, you know, as a society, you know, we love to chat, we love to have conversations, you know, sort of privately. You and I have had many great conversations, but actually, you know, going out there publicly, going out there and sharing your thoughts is a brave thing to do. So I appreciate you doing that for me today. And you know, I think your comments will be very valuable. And I'm really, you know, I'm very passionate about supporting women during this time. I've got, you know, such respect for the whole period of pregnancy and new motherhood, and I find it totally magical. And I'm totally in love with your little baby as well. I love your pictures that you send me. They make me smile so much. So carry on, keep doing that, because that's always a good thing for me. So
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Take care.